Welcome to part 2 of our special event dedicated to Sister Maria Provaznikova. In this part, we add a segment omitted during the original Zoom recording. The question I want to ask myself is, what was life like in Czechoslovakia in 1948? The answer is simple. The life was difficult and more critical times were coming, obviously. The reasons are clear. There was a communist putsch in February. And when I say a putsch, I'm not quite correct because it was not a classical putsch. It was not a putsch, really. There were no angry crowds fighting with the police. There were no army units marching to the presidential palace. There was not even a shot fired. The transfer of power was prepared well in advance, and the communists only waited for a good moment. And the moment came in February when a group of democratic ministers in the government of Klement, a communist himself, decided to hand in their resignations. The plan was that the president would ask Prime Minister Gottwald to step down with his government, form a temporary government, and call for the early elections. In the elections, the Democrats wanted to defeat the communists. The plan was good, but quite naive, and it never materialized. What happened was that the president himself, old, weary, exhausted, backed down under the communist influence and permitted Klement Gottwald to fill in the blanks, fill the posts with his own supporters. So quite suddenly the communists had no obstacle in front of them, and they controlled the whole country. For many people in Czechoslovakia, it was a surprise, an unpleasant one. Many people decided to leave the country. In the long run, we speak about thousands of Czechoslovaks leaving for the West. The Sokol organization was not spared. The chair, Starosta, Antonín Hřebík, left in spring, even before the big SLET, which was held in July in Prague. The SLET itself was very important for the Sokol organization. We have heard how beautiful the whole performance and the whole thing was, how breathtaking the exercises were. But it was also an opportunity to commemorate the Sokols who perished in the World War II. Maria Provaznikova had the SLET as a personal mission. She worked very hard to organize that, and she believed in the idea of the SLET. We must remember that some of the Sokols warned that it might be abused in a communist propaganda. And they were right, because the communist government believed that it can be used for their own propaganda purposes, because the communist takeover was criticized, not so much in the country itself, because it would be risky, but abroad. And the communist government thought, well, we permit the Sokol, which is, as everybody knows, not a communist organization. It is, in fact, an organization which is not in favor of the communist ideas. So if we permit the Sokols to have their SLET, we can have it as an argument that we are a democratic country, because only a democratic country would permit a thing like a Sokol SLET. So the critical Sokols warned, let us not do the SLET because we will help the communists, and it is absurd to exercise freely in something which is in fact a cage. But the majority of Sokols were in favor of the SLET. The SLET took place. It was a success. Maria Provaznikova had some hard times during the SLET because the communist police followed her very tightly. But she managed to pull it off. After the SLET, the situation was even more tense, but Maria Provaznikova had a plan. She was a coach of our team of lady gymnasts, and there was the Olympic Games in London. She managed to go to London with her team after some harassment from the Czechoslovak authorities, but she managed to go. In London, she was met with a success and her team won the gold medals. But before the games ended, Maria Provaznikova joined a group of East Europeans, Czechoslovaks and some Hungarians, who decided not to leave to their homelands. It was quite a piece of news. The head of the victorious team decided not to leave to Czechoslovakia. The decision is, of course, a personal one. She decided to go to the United States and start a new adventurous chapter of her life.
And now we go to her life after the Olympics. So the excitement, the grandeur, the glory of the Olympics ended abruptly for her when she became a refugee. Suddenly she was without a country, without family, without job. She was on her own. But she did have the other Sokols, the Sokol sisters and brothers, and it was they who always came through. So in London, she was offered hospitality by the Dudeks, but she had to wait for a visa for the States until almost Christmas. She had a job offer from Dr. Margaret Brown of Panzer College, but bureaucracy intervened. Her visa finally came through by almost Christmas, so she had to hurry up to secure passage because her passport was running out at the end of the year. She finally left on Christmas Day, arrived in New York City on New Year's Day, 1949. She was totally penniless because she had exhausted her entire bank account that she had in a Chicago bank to pay for her passage. Now, in those days, there were no refugee programs. There was no safety net. So she was on her own. She found lodging with an elderly widow in the Czech neighborhood, and she started the brutal commute to Panzer College in New Jersey. And after work, of course, she plunged into Sokol work. She became member of Sokol New York, where she helped set up Relief for Sokols in Exile, which was a group that collected clothing and supplies to send to refugee camps. They apparently packed and sent hundreds of boxes. I actually remember getting Czech books from them. Some of them were hard copies, but there were many that the group mimeographed by themselves. She wrote weekly scripts for Radio Free Europe, later for Voice of America, to make a little bit of money. She taught at instructor schools. She set up and directed Sokol camps. She composed mass and smaller exercises. She wrote articles. She was members of many organizations, such as this one, the SVU. She just worked and worked. It was no wonder that she fell several times in the streets of New York. Once it was attributed to exhaustion and malnutrition. She had been existing on bread and instant coffee. Another time she had lacerations and bruises on her face, which she tried to hide with sunglasses. She fell in the main post office. She fell several times just because she was doing so much. This was taking a toll on her. But it was her broadcasting that created a danger for my family. And so in June 1949, our family with 3 daughters, ages 5, 8, and 10, hiked across the Shumava Mountains into the Western Zone in Bavaria, where we stayed in the refugee camp. Now, this is the telegram that she sent after she found out that we had escaped. And the refugee camp that where we stayed the longest was the one on the bottom in Murnau. We continued to get gifts from her, packages, even after we went to Pakistan. Now, 2 years later, actually, in 1952, we finally got our visas, sailed into New Harbor, passed the Statue of Liberty, and had an incredible, rejoiced reunion with her. There she was on the dock, but she had brought along 2 older gentlemen, Mr. Kalabza, Mr. Fogel. They came in their huge Cadillacs to pick us up. Now, we had never seen a Cadillac before, but they took us to where we were going to be living. And there we got an enormous surprise. She had bought a house, a duplex in Flushing. And it was a marvel how with $500, she was able to buy a $12,000 house. But in this country, it was possible. So we moved in there. And because my parents had to do a lot of their medical education again, do their internships and residencies because they were not recognized here, she took over running the household, cooking for us, taking care of us, taking us to Sokol every week. She was the one who was our caretaker, in addition to all her Sokol activities. Now, she also recruited other people to join Sokol. The family I remember very fondly were 3 Pokorny sisters who remain members to this very day, now in their 80s. The house was full of friends, mostly refugees, former ministers in exile, Alice Masaryk, there was Marta Hermanova, I could go on, but her favorite were Hanička and Lada Fajrabend. So we got to meet all these Czech people. In order to keep us away from the sweltering heat in the summer, we rented a small cottage, rural cottage, usually rustic, very cheap, in Vermont, Maine, once in Canada. And there she again took care of us. She cooked, she baked, but most importantly of all, she gave us Czech lessons. She wanted to make sure we did not forget our Czech language and could also learn the grammar. One time, she agreed to teach me Latin. After all these decades, she taught me the first year, for which I took a final exam when I went back to school to get credit. I got 100%, and this is because she remembered so much. She expected excellence. She did not settle for anything less. If anyone said, I cannot do it, she said, there is no such thing as can or cannot. It's a matter of willpower. You try, and you will do it. I think we end here in 56.
So Sokol in the United States continued to be about education with training of instructors and citizen gymnasts, weekly workouts throughout the year for all community members. Within 6 years, her family secure in North America, it was time to highlight Sokol with a SLET in exile in Vienna. I'd like to introduce three lovely young ladies, two of whom Provaznikova mentored in their gymnastic careers. On the second from the left is Irene Wynnichuck, now president of American Sokol's Eastern District, who'll speak about the 1952 Olympic trials. Norma Zabka, on the right hand at the very end, Olympic judge and member of American Gymnastic Hall of Fame, will discuss rhythmic gymnastics as it continued to grow in appeal. And my sister Zuzka will talk about the 1956 Sokol SLET in Vienna.
In 1956, I was 17. I qualified to be on the women's team in New York. And I was absolutely thrilled to find out about going to the SLET, and that some of us were able to go because there was sponsorship from Radio Free Europe. There was a group of Americans, some from Canada actually. We went on a chartered flying Tiger airline who used to transport goods across to China during the war. But at any rate, it was an almost 24-hour flight. When we landed in Vienna, I was shocked when the immigration officer greeted us in Czech, because there were so many Czechs in Vienna. And I could not believe my eyes when I saw red poppies once again that I hadn't seen for years. Now, in contrast to the 1948 SLET, this one 8 years later was a very small affair. There weren't very many people, but there was so much excitement. It was so thrilling because people were just so terribly happy to be together, to have a SLET under freedom. And this was the beginning of future ones. So we did our mass calisthenics. The six of us did our ball routine. And after the SLET, there was an excursion to Switzerland, to Paris. But what was the touching most of all was a stop in Austria in Etztal. And there on the upper left are the rapids where Miroslav Tirš perished last century. We ended up in Paris, the city of light, my first time there. And so me, this whole experience was something extraordinary. I witnessed the dedication of so many Sokols, how they came together, and again, how they were so devoted, how they loved my grandmother.
I want to say that I want to add something about the SLET in Vienna. It was interesting that when the Viennese planned that SLET, the communists in Czechoslovakia invited the children, the Sokol children from Vienna, to a free camp in Czechoslovakia so that they would not be able to attend the SLET. That was very interesting to me. As Zuzka said, that trip was sponsored by Radio Free Europe because Sister Provaznikova spoke regularly on Radio Free Europe. As far as that SLET is concerned, I think Zuzka explained it all. I don't think it needs more explanation. And I think
Tell us about your work with rhythmic gymnastics and my grandmother.
Pardon?
Rhythmic gymnastics.
Tell us about your work with rhythmic gymnastics, which was brought, I believe, from Europe to the United States.
Yes, it was brought to Europe from the Nanchelnitsa, the director of women from American Sokol. That was Mrs. Burkhall. She was the wife of the president of American Sokol. But actually, we in the United States were not accustomed to working with hand equipment. And if we did work with it, it was just as a decoration, not as an activity, or we didn't have the manipulative skills. However, Sister Provaznikova taught us those skills, and we learned a lot, especially at the Sokol instructors courses, which were held during the summer, at which I attended with her. She not only was an instructor to the students, but she was an instructor to the instructors. She taught us a lot about organization. She taught us a lot about the kinesiology. She, as I said, she improved the instructor's curriculum very much, I think. Well, there's so much to say, I don't even know what to say. She was my mentor, and as I said, as other people have said, no job was too big or too small for her. She was president of Sokol, New York for a while. She ended up had to go down to the police station and many problems that we had with rentals. So she handled any kind of situation that came before her. And everybody has to admire that woman.
In the Sokol spirit. Evidently, and again, I'm not expert at this, but she was asked to create the women's gymnastic routine for the American team for the 1952 Olympic Games. Irene went with her to the trials. She was going to talk about that. And ultimately, the American women did not do well. They had not been training for years the way that the Czechs did. And so for the next Olympics, there's a whole nother story that I will tell in a few moments. But she was a part of that, and among other things. So I'll go to Irene. And are you ready, Irene?
After Sister Provaznikova arrived in the United States and spent time at Sokol, New York, teaching our classes and educating us in the Sokol system, she was asked in 1952 by the U.S. Women's Olympic Gymnastic Team officials to compose a team exercise for the 8 competitors to perform as a group as a required part of the competitions in Helsinki. Portable hand apparatus was required, and wands are what they specified. She selected me to teach the composition to before the Olympic trials, which were held at the University of Pennsylvania at State College in the spring of 1952. We met there and worked with the team to teach them the exercise. By choosing Sister Provaznikova to compose the required exercise, the Olympic Committee recognized and honored her talent and experience. This team event was required at the Olympic Games in 1952 for the first time, and in 1956 for the last time. However, in 1956, I had the privilege of in Vienna to participate in the first SLET in Europe after World War II. Again, Sister Provaznikova composed an exercise with portable hand apparatus, but this time balls. She taught it to 6 women in New York. It was beautiful, and we performed it at the SLET and several Sokol stops along our way to the conclusion of the trip in Paris. Then, much later in 2017, as part of the American Sokol National Awards Program, the Eastern District of American Sokol nominated Sister Provaznikova for the Dr. Miroslav Dirsch Honor Award, the highest award of American Sokol, which placed her in the American Sokol Hall of Fame. At the awards presentation ceremony during the time of our SLET in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, as president of the Eastern District, I accepted the award in her honor. It was my privilege to have been a beneficiary of her vast knowledge and her willingness to share it with all. Long live Sokol. Nazdar.
By 1956, both my parents had found work in Cincinnati, Ohio. Provaznikova's life, her hopes and her dreams for Sokol, and her livelihood at Panzer College, Voice of America, and Radio Free Europe were all New York-based. Again, she had to make a decision that would alter her life, supporting our little family or continuing to pursue her passion. She could not bear to think of the children without 3 warm meals each day, and joined us as she did 4 years later when we moved again to Schenectady. In each home, she had an office where she spent most of her time in correspondence with the Sokol world, including covert communication with Sokols behind the Iron Curtain, writing, publishing, intermittently traveling to meetings and special events, and hosting Sokol volunteer visitors, typically from abroad, to help her with her work. At the age of 75, she decided that Long Island City, close to Sokol, New York, and Astoria, would be the best place for her. She found a small one-bedroom basement apartment and continued her Sokol work, taught Czech to folks like Alan Levy, and seeing a need in a new wave of Czech refugees. At the age of 82, she founded and directed a children's camp in Haddam, Connecticut. Dr. Jitka Zobal-Ratner, now a pediatric ophthalmologist in Albany, New York, attended that camp for several years.
So Tabor Sokol, which was in East Haddam, Connecticut, and as these pictures show, Pani Provaznikova, pictured here, was still very much in SLET mode, even though we are now 17 years after her last SLET. Next slide, please. So I was there for 4 summers between 1973 and 1976. I was 10 to 13 years old at the time, and Pani Provaznikova was 82 to 85 years old at the time, not exactly a time when most people take up starting a children's summer camp. This was 3 weeks in the summer, and the purpose, I assume, was to give us Czech culture, Czech literacy, and an appreciation for the outdoors and physical fitness. We had approximately 40 to 60 children, and the male to female ratio was approximately the same. And a typical day camp meant that we were awoken and we had morning exercise. And I don't know if you can see that arrow, but this is me right here. Since the camp was at the top of a hill, we had to run down and back up the hill several times. Pani Provaznikova, pictured right here, led us in calisthenics. Remember, she's in her mid-80s at this time. After that, we had to clean, not just wash up, but also our personal belongings next to our bed. The flag ceremony was important. Every morning we would raise both the American and the Czech flags, and at night before dinner we would lower it again. 1 boy and 1 girl were chosen each day, and this was an honor, and we treated it as such and took it quite seriously. The food was delicious and homemade. I was a notoriously picky eater at that time, but even I acknowledged that the food was delicious. We had school. So here we are, Pani Provaznikova teaching the older children. And we had this Monday through Friday. And I think this boy, is my arrow showing up right here? It's not. Well, it's this fellow with the arms crossed in the gray t-shirt. And his face says, yep, we're in school in August. And we went and we learned, but we didn't necessarily like it. However, I left Czechoslovakia when I was just beginning kindergarten, meaning I didn't know how to read and write. But because of Pani Provaznikova, I can now read and write. So as an adult, I thank you, although at the time we didn't really like it. Now, a bit of interesting piece of history in this picture, this blackboard, in her typical make-do MacGyver sort of way, this was really a piece of plywood painted black, and she would write upon it with white chalk. The surface was lumpy, but it worked, and we all learned Czech. Our activities were both structured and unstructured. We had formal games, but also adequate time to play. And we had a competition. Most activities were scored, starting with how clean your bed was made. Everything, our art, how quickly we climbed ropes, and were scored. We had point deductions for speaking English. We were only allowed to speak Czech. Being children, we cheated every time the adults turned their backs. And then we had a composite score at the end of camp. Now, my first camp was in 1973, and here I, Jitka Zobalova, came in second. This, I think, inspired in me a sense of competitiveness, which I have to this day and has probably served me quite well for the future. We had special activities. In addition to the Czech school, we had Czech songs, and we all knew how to sing both the Czech and the Slovak national anthem along with other songs. We had Czech food, and when we wanted special cakes with berries, we had to go out into the prickly briars and pick them ourselves. Most camps have fires, but I think ours were still somehow special. Now, we had a bus ride to the lake. Why is this special? Our camp was not fancy. We were not situated on a lake. We didn't have horses. We didn't have high ropes courses set up for us. We really had to learn how to make fun. And we've seen in past presentations how she was really all about that. And of course, we had unstructured time. Being kids, we found our way to the local store to buy candy. And one year, I started camp as a brunette and emerged as a blonde, much to my father's bewilderment. An unsanctioned camp activity was after the counselors retired, the older children would sneak out during the night and we would just hang out and chat, sometimes play spin the flashlight. And yes, camp was where I had my first kiss. So on behalf of all the kids in your camps, we thank you very much, Mrs. Provaznikova, Pani Provaznikova, for taking us immigrant children and giving us a connection to our roots and a sense of belonging in this new world. Moc vám děkujeme, Pani Provaznikova. Thank you.
By the age of 88, Baba was ready to leave New York, but there was one more family service she could provide. She made her way to Salem, Oregon to help her granddaughter, Magda. And I believe Magda is in the audience. So she went to Oregon to help Magda and to teach her great-grandson, Alex Schay, the Czech language. From Portland, Oregon, Alex Schay, now a consultant in renewable energy and forest products, will talk about time spent with Prababa when she lived with his family in Salem.
Yeah, so, just kind of picking up on where others have left off, my Prababa moved in with us at the same age when my Aunt Zuzka was doing her 1948 SLET. So I was 9. And her goal, or so she said, was to try and teach me to speak Czech. I don't know if you can tell from the video, but I'm blind. And at the time I could see better, but I couldn't see well. And by the age of 88, 89, 90, my Prababa could not hear well. So I could not see the things that she was writing on the pieces of paper. And she could not hear my efforts and attempts to pronounce. And so at one point, as a frustrated 10-year-old, I said to her, Babo, I cannot see what you are writing, and you cannot hear what I am trying to say. This isn't working. So unfortunately, unlike the experience that our previous speaker had, I was not able to learn Czech. But many other things happened that mirror a lot of the conversations that we've heard. For example, even though she was in her 90s, she continued her forays into animal husbandry because even when she was relaxing, she was always working. And so we had rabbits, and she was very gentle and very caring and very kind with the rabbits, including as she went to weigh them when they got a little bit older. And once they surpassed 5 pounds, she would go to my father and she would say, Peter, it is now time to kill the rabbits. And so the rabbits would be slaughtered, and then we would have them in our food. So going back to that whole food tradition and food independence. But again, a lot of her life, as described previously, was spent in her office and spent corresponding and spent writing her own materials or helping other people write materials about her or about Sokol. She remained unwavering in her support of and her advocacy for democracy. Harry Bloodstein spoke about a meeting that she didn't attend with a Soviet general. There was another meeting that she didn't attend in the late 1930s. In an effort to try and win over the Czech people, Adolf Hitler wanted to award her a special a special Nazi award, and he invited her to Berlin to accept the award. It goes without saying that she did not accept the award, but as a 10-year-old boy, she had it mailed to her, or Hitler had it mailed to her, and I held the award in my hand as a 10-year-old boy, and that's when I really first understood, what evil feels like when you hold it in the palm of your hand. I'm very, very confident that I know what my great-grandmother would have said and what she would have thought, both about Vladimir Putin and, for that matter, about the attempted coup in the United States on January 6th. And so she continued her life with us in Portland. Well, no, actually, we're in Salem, another town in Oregon. And very much unwavering in her dedication and devotion to Sokol, democracy, and animal husbandry. And with that, I'll pass it on to Petr. Petr?
Thank you, Alex. It's Petr. The important thing here is that I have a good friend whom I know from my time in London, where we worked together for the Czech section of the BBC. Milan Kocourek is a fine journalist and a good person. I didn't know that he's an active Sokol. Now I do, and he will tell us about the SLET in Vienna in 1982. Milan?
I came there in 1982 and met Maria Provaznikova as a journalist, as a correspondent there. I was covering the foreign Sokol SLET for BBC, and I was actually impressed by Maria Provaznikova talking at the town hall where we were met. We were actually welcomed by the mayor of Vienna, and there were politicians talking, and journalists were not making too many notes because the speeches were not awfully interesting. But when Maria Provaznikova started talking, that was very different, because she was then, was it 92 she was. She talked without notes, and immediately all the journalists started really to take attention, and she was really very good. And I asked her also for interview, I remember, and one of my questions for the BBC was, what do you say about Spartakiady, the Czech events? Because communists basically stole sleds from Sokols. And I asked her, what do you think of Spartakiady in Czechoslovakia? And she told me that she is actually welcoming those events, because youngsters have to exercise that in Tirš, in healthy body, healthy spirit, and that it is much better that Czech youngsters are actually exercising rather than causing havoc in the streets and misbehaving generally. And she was rather in favor of Spartakiady. I was a bit surprised by that. And then followed actually some years of me corresponding with Maria Provaznikova. And I was again impressed by her straightforward approach. She hated half-truths. She told me in her letters, for instance, that if she were young again, that she would start the club of truth and truthfulness and spirit of a real good, nice, honest approach to life, because she said in one of her letters that some people just pretend to be Sokols, and that she would like to again start completely new movement for youngsters. And when I, for instance, talked about Franta Erben, who was a Sokol sent to Russia before the First World War, I used the word that he was a hero, and that he actually took part in legions during the First World War. And she actually told me that she disagrees completely, because she would not consider him a hero, and that it took some time before Franta Erben actually joined the legions. And he was actually famous by the fact that he was called to Tsarist army in St. Petersburg to unite their language, because they were using German, French, and other languages in their orders even. And Franta Erben actually translated Tirš wording for them, all the orders and all the physical exercises into Russian, so that one can say, and I'm glad to say it, that possibly Soviet army later, they were actually exercising into Tirsch wording and Tirsch orders. So she thought that my use of hero in case of Franta Hermann was not correct, because it took some time before he joined the legions, and there he was not necessarily taking full part in fighting. But she always encouraged me and many others to be truthful, first of all, and to be very honest and never say a lie. And so she criticized even journalists from that point of view. And I always valued very much my memories of Maria Provaznikova, and I'm very proud that I knew her. And now, possibly, can I give word to Mrs. Anna Polesny?
Her final years were again on the East Coast with my parents. And at that time, she confided that she could not die until Czechoslovakia was a free and democratic nation. The Velvet Revolution took place in November of 1989, and there was one more goal for her to achieve. Soon she would be 100 years old. Wearing the St. Sava cravat bestowed by the King of Yugoslavia and the French Legion of Honor for two of her most precious commemorations, which were on screen at the beginning of this presentation, she received congratulatory correspondence from around the globe. A delegation of Sokols from New York arrived to wish her well. And at home, we toasted with champagne and needed 2 cakes to fit 100 candles. From Prague, a centenary message was broadcast to her beloved Sokols.
Milí bratři, moje milé sestry, nemohu najít vhodná slova, abych vám poděkovala za všechny pozornosti, kterými jste mě zahrnuli k tomu neblahému, k těm neblahým svým narozeninám. Je to trochu mnoho na jednoho člověka. A já bych chtěla s vámi mluvit tak srdečně, jako po celý svůj život. Ne slavnostně, ne jako stoletá socha, ale jako jeden z vás, člověk, se kterým si můžeme říkat, jsme jedné krve, ty a já, jako to říkával Malvy. Sestry a bratři, v nedávných dnech jsem byla zahrnuta takovými podstami a takovou důvěru všeho sokolstva, že si uvědomuji, že to je víc, než může jeden člověk neunést. Důvěra je závazek. To je strašný závazek. A jestli nám někdo svěřil svou důvěru, jako to byl zesnulý profesor Wagner a mnozí jiní, musíme si toho vážit a starat se, aby s námi nezhasla, aby ta důvěra mezi námi. Jestli já jsem něco dokázal za svého dlouhého života, bylo to jen proto, že jsem měla vaši důvěru. Já vím, že ne všech bratří, ale také to nebyli bratři, kteří byli proti mně. Těch skutečných sokolů, kteří věří v Tirschův základní článek, náš úkol, směr a cíl, a kteří chtějí podle něho žít a pracovat. vás chci, bratři a sestry, poprosit, abyste zůstali věrní Kiršovi, a v tom budete zajedno s druhým sokolským velikým vůdcem Masarykem. Věrní Kiršovi a Masarykovi. Abyste zůstali vždycky pravdiví a pravdomluví. Nikdy nemluvili, co opravdu necítíte. Nikdy nedělali něco, co sami druhé učíte. Jenom v tom pravdě je skutečné sokolství a jenom taková důvěra, taková soudržnost může Sokol přivést k výšinám, ke kterým došel za první republiky. Tenkrát jsme si všichni věřili. A proto se nám práce dařila. Prosím vás, vraťte se k dobám první republiky. Vraťte se k Kiršovi. A Jindrovi. Tenkrát největší chvála, kterou jsem si nejvíc vážila, byla, když nejstarší mluvčí Sokolského výboru prohlásil, že ve mně roste ženský Jindra. Taková bych asi chtěla být. A takový musíme být všichni pravdiví, pravdomluví, pravdočinní, aby jsme naše myšlenky, naše slova, aby se shodovaly úplně s tím, co jednáme, co zařizujeme. Pak teprve to bude skutečný Sokol, takový Sokol, který byl za první republiky, Československá obec Sokolská. Sestry a bratři, děkuji vám za vaši lásku, protože bez lásky bychom nikam nedošli. Jen vzájemná láska nás může dovést k velikým činům. A sokolstvo potřebuje veliké činy, aby bylo hodno svého zakladatele a svého největšího vyznavače Masaryka. Sestry a bratři, milujte se, důvěřujte si, opírejte se jeden od druhého a spolupracujte. Největší zločin toho úpadkového období 42 roků, které vlastně ještě dokonce neskončilo, které ještě zdržání. Největší zločin byl ten, že lidé si přestali věřit. Kde není víra, tam není láska. A kde není víra a láska, nemůže být naděje. Sestry a bratři, milujte se navzájem, podporujte se navzájem, naučte se spolupracovat, spolu tvořit, abychom vytvořili to, o co usiloval doktor Miroslav Kirše a který nám všem tolik doporučoval jeho největší žák TDM. přeju vám, bratři, největší úspěch, jestliže zůstanete věrní těmto zakladatelům. Proto jsem dal teď tisknout ze své chudé kapsy jeho základní článek Náš úkol, směr a cíl, který po 42 roků nebyl vůbec dosažitelný, byl rozebraný a netiskl se dál. Jak jsme mohli podle něho učit, když jsme si ho nemohli přečíst. A teď bych chtěla, aby z mých úspor, které po mně zůstanou, aby bylo vytištěno asi 20 000 kopií tohoto článku, aby byly rozdávány sokolům, kteří sokoly vyrostli z dětství přes dorost až do senství. Teprve, když někdo v sokole vyroste ve všech věkových stupních a vstoupil do členstva jako opravdový, oddaný sokol. Teprve pak můžeme být, že je uvědomělý sokol takový, kterého žádal od nás TGM. Když řekl, každý opravdový, to jest uvědomělý sokol, bude strážcem a ochráncem naší demokracie. V této práci máte mé požehnání. Amen. Upřímné, z hloubi duše jdoucí přání. Vaše Marie Provazniková.
She died a few months later. Posthumously, Václav Havel awarded her the Order of Támaszkáray Másaryk. As to her contributions, vis-a-vis her premature daughter, 3 generations later, there are now 22 of us. In gymnastics, in 1982, after spending time with Provaznikova, Petr Dusek, Jr., published his PhD thesis at the University of Utah, Maria Provaznikova, Her Life and Contribution to Physical Education, the authoritative book on her work. The final chapter speaks of her contributions to world gymnastics. Peter's wife, Jean Dusek, a lifelong Sokol and instructor of artistic and rhythmic gymnastics and fitness for seniors in Sokol, Cleveland, will encapsulate this final chapter. Jean?
Most people are unaware of the influence of Sokol and Maria Provaznikova had on the beginnings of female participation in international gymnastics competition and the apparatus they compete on today. Jadwiga Zamoyska of Poland approached her father-in-law, president of the Federation of International Gymnastics, at the 1933 Executive Committee and gained approval for establishing the Women's Technical Committee. She turned to Maria and the CHOS Women's Technical Committee to establish the program. Awards would be granted only to teams based on individual apparatus scores, plus the group number with hand implements done to music. Fluid movements, balance, rhythm, execution over difficulty, and avoidance of harmful skills were stressed. Only women coaches, judges, and spotters would be permitted at the meets. The first Olympics to be presided over by the FIG Women's Technical Committee were the 1936 Games in Berlin. Events included the high balance beam, uneven parallel bars, side horse vault with pummels, and the team rhythmic routine done with hand implements and accompanied by music. Sokol ladies used uneven parallel bars and high balance beam in their competitions and adapted appropriate skills. However, exercises on these events were virtually unknown outside of Sokol. Originally, there was opposition to their use in international competition, but now they are a permanent part of the women's gymnastic program. After the 1948 Olympics in London, Marie resigned from both the CHOS and FIG women's technical committees, and because of her stand against the communists, could not return to her country. Maria Provaznikova was a person who did much to lay the foundation for women's gymnastics as we know it today. Under different conditions, she would have been honored internationally for her unselfish endeavors for women, Sokol, and her country. But if you Google women's gymnastics, high balance beam, or uneven parallel bars, you are hard pressed to find any reference to her, the Czechs, or Sokol. Thank you.
Martin Klement is a historian who works in the very building where Maria Provaznikova lived for most of her productive life in then Czechoslovakia. Martin will speak about the archives in Tyr's house in Prague, and she will tell us about the treasures concerning Maria Provaznikova they have in possession. Martin?
Thank you, Peter. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to explain you how the archive of the Czech Sokol organization has developed, how it's structured, what's the legacy of Maria Provaznikova in this archive, and what are the most spectacular items of her former property now kept in the depots in the Tyr's house. Unfortunately, as the time is already over, I jump over directly to the third part of the presentation, to the legacy of Maria Provaznikova in the archive. Apart from the personal fund of Vladimír Ptáček, which consists of many linear meters of documents, the personal fund of Maria Provaznikova is the second largest personal fund in the whole archive of the Czech Sokol organization. For the font is typical the diversity of the objects. Let's have a look. The font includes letters, diaries, and notes written by Maria Provaznikova. It contains hundreds of her photographs as well. We also managed to collect books which are either written by her or dedicated to her. The next part of the Provazhnikova's font is large number of her LPs. Last but not least, three-dimensional objects belong to the font as well. The systematization of the Provazhnikova's font hasn't been terminated yet. During the work, we are confronted with two main problems. The first one is the extreme size of the font. Secondly, thanks to the notes like this, we know that the font has been created from the gifts provided by Jiří Liška, Alena Polesny, or Zdena Srdínková. However, we still happen to find different objects from Provazhnikova's property, which aren't a part of the gifts and which apparently don't have anything to do with Provaznikova. An example can be this LP and this book. Yet, when we look more closely on them, we can see the signature Prva, what Provaznikova used to sign her things with. Based on the above mentioned, the Provazhnikova's font is still expanding. Coming to the end of my presentation, I would like to show you some extraordinarily interesting pieces from Provazhnikova's font. Let's start with this notebook, a sort of chronicle written by Provaznikova in the last years of her life. We can see that she tried to mention the most important information from her life, from the Sokol life, and from the policy of each recorded year. It can be said is her personal retrospect on the 20th century. telegram to the British king. Comparing the handwriting, we can conclude that the text was written by the president Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk. Many photographs in the font, for example this one, don't depict Marie Provaznikova herself, but they provide a unique insight in her private life. Furthermore, we can't forget some three-dimensional objects. For example, the bust of Provaznikova, the key of the City Hall in Cleveland with the signature of the Mayor Ralph Perk, and Provaznikova's personal clubs. Some of these things have been already used in some exhibitions, in documentaries about Provaznikova, and in the research about the Sokol grave in Prague, in which Provaznikova herself is buried. Thank you very much for your attention, and I give the word back to Petr.
Jean Hruby will tell us something about Sokol today, and it will be a closing presentation of our whole session. Jean?
Thank you, Petr. American Sokol is so grateful to have had Maria Provaznikova as a member of our organization and to call her sister. When we speak of women, and you mentioned this before, women breaking the glass ceiling, she definitely was one of those people. She bravely brought her knowledge and expertise of the Sokol movement to America and was a pioneering female under the leadership in our organization. As the first female president myself of American Sokol, and as the World Sokol Federation president, I feel Sister Maria's influence and strength all the time. She is a woman I strive to be as well. Today, the Sokol movement continues to thrive around the globe, especially in our homeland, where it all began. We have 18 partner organizations in the World Sokol Federation, including Sokols in Czechia, Slovakia, Austria, Slovenia, Poland, France, Gran Canaria, Switzerland, Sweden, Serbia, Australia, England, Germany, and of course here in North America we have 3 different Sokol organizations, and of course we have in Canada, a Sokol Canada. Yep, you know, there are Sokols that still exist that operate independently. They are not part of World Sokol, but they are still our brothers and sisters, no matter what. I've stayed personally in contact by Sokols in Ukraine, and been dealing with the war there, and it's nice to be able to reach out and have that they are able to reach out and connect with brother and sister Sokols around the world. We strive to continue the mission of our forefathers, and I will say foremothers, built that what they built, serving our communities and developing the strong and healthy minds. One of our main visions we're still focusing on is to keep the Sokol history alive, so that our story and stories of people like Sister Maria remain forever in an endless future. We do still gather every 6 years in Prague when we celebrate at the International SLET hosted by the Czech Sokols. And I do invite all of you to the next SLET in the summer of 2024 in Prague. Information is not yet available, but as time draws near, all the information will be available on the Czech Sokol website or World Sokol Federation website. In Sokol, we have this saying, we say nazdar, whether when we greet each other and when we say goodbye. Our classes still end, the teacher says nazdar, and the students reply zdar. And we also give final salutes as people pass on. And we salute them with a final goodbye to our brothers and sisters. And I'm just so honored to be a part of this event today, celebrating our sisters' great contributions into Sokol and to society. And I thank you, her family, and Susanna for making this happen. And to end this amazing day, I'm really honored to close this event by saying Ach žije Sokol, which means long live Sokol, and I salute her with a sincere, and Sokol's with me if you know what we're going to do. I salute her with a sincere zdar, zdar, zdar.
Thank you, Jean. So, Zuzana?
Yes.
I think you were going to start the question.
Oh, so we are maybe exhausted. I don't know. If anybody listening, watching, has any questions or any comments that they would like to share, please do it. I would like to maybe start with the fact that I don't know if we mentioned that the book, the memoirs of Provaznikova, will be published in conjunction with the SLET in 2024. At least that's what I heard. And I mean, so far it's in Czech, and so it also probably needs to be translated into English, and hopefully we'll find some good translation of her memoirs. So please, Peter and Anna, look into the chat box if there's any question.
Okay. Where were the SLETs performed? How big was the stadium?
It's Strahov Stadium.
Okay.
And it's as big as 9 football fields. And one of the most amazing things in performing there, the sound, they had live orchestras, and the piping, they had piping that the orchestra would play through these giant pipes, and the sound would travel up through the ground across the field. So they had, to be able to do that, they didn't have electronic equipment, that we have today. So to have everybody in unison was truly amazing.
Here's an interesting question. I'm confused about the use of the term gymnastics. I think of balance beam, floor exercise, pommel horse. Can someone explain about this? It seems like these gymnastics are something entirely different.
The group calisthenics, so when we're referring to the gymnastics, we are referring to gymnastics on a beam, on a floor routine, on rings, on bars. But the group calisthenics is just something different. It's a different element of the Sokol movement, and it's an activity that people of all ages can participate in. So when we refer to the field and the sleds and the performances that are going on, it's the group calisthenics. That's not technically the gymnastic part, but our organization does. It is known for our gymnastic teams.
Kathy, I had the pleasure to meet Mrs. Provaznikova when she visited Sokol, Los Angeles, probably between 1955 and 1962. I had no idea how famous she was, but I remember that my parents thought she was a very famous person. I was an early teenager at the time. We escaped Czechoslovakia through the mountains in 1945 and lived in refugee camps in America, occupied Germany for 6 years prior to arriving in LA with a sponsor in 1955.
I believe we have with us, or had with us, and I would like to say hello to all the Sokols in San Francisco, in Chicago, and in Washington, because they were very helpful with promoting this event, and I hope that SVU would keep cooperating on some other projects.
Well, heartfelt thanks to everyone who participated and who joined in. It's been a wonderful experience for me, and I hope that you learned something, confirmed something, that you enjoyed it.
I thank everybody for his or her contribution. And of course, we thank all who shared their memories of Maria Provaznikova with us.
Thank you very much for hosting this.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye to everyone.
Nazdar. Nashledanou, nazdar.
Nashledanou. Nashledanou.
Nazdar, nashledanou.